Hi guys, and welcome back to this week's episode of Let's Chat Ethics. I'm your co-host Oriana.
And I'm your other co-host Amanda.
And this week we're going to be looking at the MIT Technology Review article by Karen Howe. And the title is How Facebook Got Addicted to Spreading Misinformation. So it's a really interesting article and it goes into lots of detail and kind of a historical timeline of how Facebook got where it is today with the spread of misinformation. So it largely focuses on the director of AI at Facebook, Joaquin Quiñonero, and his journey from when he started to kind of where he is now. And he was the real implementer of the algorithm that plays on our psychology. And that algorithm essentially got Facebook to where it is today. It's the algorithm that allows us to have targeted advertising. So it can, target adverts that people dependent on their political views, their race, their age, their social interests, their habits. So he was the one who really implemented that and had the team that worked on that. So he really was the driver of getting Facebook to where it isn't now in terms of its engagement, its real big platform. And it also largely focuses on how, Mark Zuckerberg has an absolute hunger and drive for engagement, and all the funding just went into departments that were looking at, growth. So he wanted to be the biggest platform in the world and kind of would do anything to get there. And it also talks about how Joaquin ended up heading up the team that looked at bias, but by focusing largely on bias, they didn't focus on misinformation. And as the article kind of explains, that Zuckerberg knew this misinformation was happening and that he kind of chose to actually, almost turn a blind eye to it and purposely fund other projects. So, yeah, I'm not sure what your thoughts were, Amanda, but I'd love to hear what you think about this.
Yeah, I think what was interesting and I don't want to say surprising exactly, but in my mind, Facebook hadn't done anything to sort of prevent more misinformation and that sort of thing from happening. But in my mind, that had happened more out of ignorance. Whereas in this case, it seems like they knew there was a problem and basically not dealing with misinformation. It seems like it has been actually a much more deliberate choice than I thought. Like I thought, they just didn't have the staff, I guess, that would think, oh, hey guys, maybe there's a problem with this. But it seems like even once they realized that there was a problem, they made a very deliberate choice to ignore that, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So there's a bit where they're talking specifically about fairness, right? Because Joaquin, he is part of a team, or he actually leads a team that was leading a team working on, ironically, I think named the Responsible AI team. But that
was ironic.
That very specifically focuses on bias. And of course, I think that bias is an important aspect, and I think it's actually the part of ethics and AI that's getting the most attention. Even though in a way there's other issues that are equally as important that might actually be, I don't want to say easier to tackle, but a lot of the bias that we have in algorithms, if a lot of it is coming from the data or the way the models are trained, it's, I think, more difficult to tackle than something like we are choosing to ignore this problem, right? Like the application of certain models, that seems like, to me, a more obvious place where you might stop doing something if it's obviously negative. So in the article, Karen is talking about how Facebook is sort of desperately trying not to alienate their conservative users, or I don't want to, actually, they're not customers, let's call them users. And they're kind of really going out of their way to do this. So one of the examples that they use is with the idea of fairness, and in a way this is to do with bias, but maybe in a slightly different way. It's this idea that there are different definitions of fairness, and this was something that we saw in the ProPublica and the Compass software, the one that would predict the likelihood of recidivism and predicted higher possibilities for people of color. That the response from Compass to the ProPublica investigation that showed that it was racist was that actually, according to their own fairness metric, it wasn't. And so we do know that, especially at sort of, I think fairness sounds like it's not a vague idea, but truly it's extremely vague. And when you're trying to condense that into a mathematical, a quantifiable version of fairness is incredibly
vague.
Vague. And so, in this case, Compass and ProPublica both used definitions of fairness that seemed reasonable enough, and yet according to one of them the software was fair, and according to the other one it wasn't. And so we see that sort of also feeding into this article where they decide that in order to be fair to their conservative users, the algorithm needs to flag their content as often as it flags the liberal content, the democratic content, right? And that's truly not correct, because if the conservatives are spreading misinformation and hate speech at a higher rate, then you would expect a good algorithm for detection of misinformation and hate speech to obviously report the conservatives at a much higher rate. So in effect, and this is something that the article does talk about, if you try to build a system that is quote unquote fair and that it reports everybody equally, what you're building is a useless algorithm in terms of actually detecting this hate speech and misinformation if one of the groups is spewing more hate than
that's
one.
Honestly, that was something that really jumped out to me in the article. But again, it didn't surprise me in the sense of, obviously I'd been following what Facebook were doing and how Zuckerberg had already been accused of taking kind of pandering to Trump and pandering to the Republican Party, and how but I thought like her reporting was really it was a good piece of investigative wait, is that right?
Yeah.
It was a good piece of investigative journalism, because I felt like she really got deeper into what was happening at each point in the history of the past 10 years or something. And I thought, when she was talking about how Kaplan was promoted to from the head of to US policy head to global vice president for policy, and how he was really pushing Zuckerberg to pander to the Republicans more and to not take this bias, I'm saying bias quote unquote, approach to flagging conservative claims like you were saying. But to your point already, the article says this completely disregards the whole point of trying to get hate speech or tackling misinformation, because look what happened in the Capitol. Look, and they already said that these groups were formed through Facebook, and a lot of this misinformation, disinformation has been coming from the more Republican conservative side. So what's the point of Facebook really? I know a lot of these companies want to be more quote unquote neutral because they don't want to take a political stance, but it's not really taking a political stance, in my opinion, if you are tackling an actual problem that can then lead to real life harm, which obviously the Capitol led to people dying. So I think I don't know, it's just, I guess it's disappointing really. I get I think to me the other bits that really stood out, I was this whole culture in it's not just tech, but in a lot of companies in the US where it's growth, the departments that get the most money are the ones bringing growth and la 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 la. And they were saying that the department when they were creating this fairness kind of responsible AI, they didn't really at first get much funding anyway, because they weren't seen as a growth department. So I think it was just interesting how she really painted the picture, which I guess we've all seen anyway, that Zuckerberg is really this like kind of money hungry guy who will kind of do anything at any cost to get to the top, which, you know, like the fact he was so competitive with Google, and he wants to be the big and the best, somewhere where you get all your news from, somewhere where you engage with all your friends, somewhere where groups come together. And I think it's just kind of feels like the original purpose of Facebook has, from, you know, like socializing with friends, has really turned quite sinister now.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that in a way, you know, you were saying that you're sort of disappointed that all these big tech companies are trying not to take any kind of political stance. But I think by pretending like they can remove themselves from this conversation entirely, basically that like we're just a platform and you know, whatever, and it's all about growth and this survival of the fittest, essentially what provides the most engagement. They're in fact, I think, taking a very conservative approach to all of it, right? It's basically like they're the government in their own sort of bubble that they've created in social media, and they want a small government. Like, so yeah, this sort of idea that you're completely responsible for everything you do online, and that, you know, because even Joaquin, at the end of the article, he's quoted saying that, you know, regardless of what Facebook do to tackle misinformation and hate speech, people will still spew lies and hate speech regardless of AI. And I think that's really sort of just completely shifting the blame onto people and the users. And I think actually it's important that to know that, yeah, we all have some responsibility in the media that we consume, in the, you know, the things we share on Facebook, the things we like on Facebook or other social media, you know, the things that we choose to interact with. But to say that essentially it doesn't really matter what Facebook does, people are still going to do this.
That's a lie, in my
opinion.
You're really... that's a big shifting of the blame.
Yeah, exactly. You're just kind of washing your hands off of this whole mess that you created by maximizing engagement. And we know that it's a lot of like negativity that breeds more engagement. Like there's all these like YouTube channels that are just trolling channels where people just put out content that will annoy other people to you know, to incite them to interact with the website or the, you know, the media itself. So I think that, you know, when that's like the metric, the engagement, that is their metric.
Exactly.
You know, if we instead decided that the metric by which we're going to measure how successful Facebook is how happy are its users, then we might have ended up with a very different problem where people are only ever sharing cute cat videos or something, you know, and then I mean, that might have its own consequences in society. But when you've decided that engagement is, and, you know, one thing that's also interesting in the article to do with the engagement problem is that they show that, and this was within Facebook, they showed that as posts get closer and closer to violating the guidelines, then they get more engagement. And so apparently at some point they thought, well, what we could do is sort of penalize, and I think they did do it for a while, where they would hide comments, for example, that were a little bit dodgy, but that, you know, weren't completely violating the guidelines. So instead of deleting them, they could hide them, and then you could choose to display them for yourself. So we know that Facebook played around with that, with sort of downgrading things that were close to violating the community guidelines. But then, as far as I know, they decided to scratch the whole thing, just scrap it, just never mind. This is not good for our numbers and our engagement. And the other thing is that, and I have no statistics, so nobody quote me on this, but I've got the feeling that it's slightly older people now that are on Facebook. rather than younger people. And I think older people do tend to be more
Are you coming for the
conservative.
boomers again?
Yeah, be careful. That's my vibe. My feeling is that there's now Facebook itself has older users. Of course, I think that a lot of this misinformation probably also goes through other Facebook owned social media, but I don't know if also maybe younger people. I don't know. I maybe now I'm a little bit biased myself because I am. Am I young? I'm almost 30.
I would consider yourself young.
Yeah,
yes.
I'm not a boomer, but I'm not the youngest.
Gen Z.
I'm not on TikTok.
You're a proud millennial.
Exactly, I am a proud millennial. So I like to think that millennials and Gen Zs are a little bit more aware, maybe because we grew up with the internet. We know that like most of the stuff you see online is probably not true.
I think that really stood out to me in the article as well. When this is the thing, him at the end saying that washing his hands of the problem really, and saying it's kind of the onus is on the user, is like you were saying, it's ridiculous because the beginning of the article literally talks about how he spoke about how his job was to create engagement through and find an algorithm that can maximize engagement. And by doing so, they found out that, negative stuff gets the most engagement, and actually fake news gets way more engagement than real news because it's like spreads like wildfire. And even like when you think about it realistically, in traditional news like that you watch on TV, when do they ever report to you positive stuff happening? Engagement unfortunately does come from like catastrophes, bad things happening. So if you can have some fake news going around that's making up all these like crazy conspiracy theories, of course they're going to get more engagement. And then if you have a CEO and a man who wants to kind of have world domination like Mark Zuckerberg, it's kind of crazy that he would wash his hands. I mean, one part of it is like, okay, of course he works there, he's not going to be my cynical side is like, well, he obviously works there, he's employed by Facebook, he's not gonna spill the real tea until one day he leaves. I guess. I think like it seemed to be like, people don't tell the real story until they've left, because I'm sure his job would be at risk if he really spilt what's actually happening. He has to have some positive reflection on Facebook, because I've seen how on Twitter, since Karen tweeted it, there's been a lot of Facebook people kind of attacking her, like you didn't interact with this department, you didn't blah blah blah. She had to do an entire thread kind of going through all the kind of lies that they told, being like, actually I reached out to this person in this department and I was told like 4 times that they were too busy. Actually, like she had to like correct all the kind of lies. So Facebook have kind of lashed out since she's released this article, which I guess would to be expected, because it's not exactly painting Facebook in a positive light. But I think this whole the whole aspect of the older users as well, I think is probably right. I mean, I don't know, I'm just going off like people I know my age, like no one really uses Facebook anymore. Like, well, I say no one. I actually I've a few of my friends have said who work in like different industries. Like I've got a friend who works in interior design, and she was saying that actually she gets a lot of her clients from Facebook, because young mums tend to there's loads of like young mums like working groups and young mums like Facebook groups. So I think, I don't know, maybe we're just thinking because people we know don't tend to use Facebook.
Yeah, that's what I was like. Nobody quote me.
But I do know what you mean. I'd be interested to see statistics though, because I don't know if Gen Z really are. Like Gen Z to me, in my head anyway, I'm like they're like TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat. I also don't feel like, just aesthetically and like from a UX design point, I don't think Facebook's like that for like cool anymore, is it?
No, it's true. Like I stopped using Facebook a while ago, and recently I've had to be on there for a while because I have a page as part of one of the experiments that I'm running, and every time I log on to look at something on my page, I'm like, what the heck? Where is anything? It looks kind of strange. I'm not a fan, but
Yeah,
maybe.
like the usability and stuff isn't great.
No, exactly. It's kind of confusing. I mean, to be honest, their API is no better, but that's my own.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I mean, you know what? I'd be really curious to see actually, because according to this article, they've built a bunch of models that actually work, like for stopping misinformation. They talked about one specifically to do with the anti-vaxxer movement that they felt worked really well, but they decided to scrap it. I think, because I don't know if it was because of the anti-conservative bias, or if it was that it lowered engagement. But from the sound of the article, they had some interesting models that I would be very, very curious about as an academic and as somebody who works in hate speech detection. And so, and
I was thinking about that.
Yeah, I'm like, and for the amount of data, and not only like just the like amount of examples that they have, but the amount of information they have about the people that are writing the comments themselves or sharing the posts. Like, that would be very interesting to me too.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like when you think about how much data Facebook really has on, like, they literally know everything. They know like someone's age, like who they would vote for, like their income. Like they know so much that it did essentially help the Cambridge Analytica influence the Trump election. Do you know what I mean? I think, and even how Facebook, it was like it was proven that they influenced the genocide in Myanmar. So I just don't know how. I don't know how this platform can be kind of neutral, as you were saying before. Even like you were saying this, to say that they're not political or not involved, but to me, by taking a neutral stance and not wanting to be biased towards conservatives, well, you're actually favouring conservatism then, actually, because you're letting lies spread. Like I would very much want them to, stop fake news coming from left-wing people. I think you should stop anything that's fake, really. They have a responsibility to stop hate speech, stop anything that's fake. And the fact it's influenced like genocide, I don't know how they can really... I don't really know how they can say they're a neutral platform anymore. Like they literally influence elections, genocides, like wars. Like
like the article puts it as, how much higher can the stakes get?
It's true. Like and I feel like do you not feel like as people, just in general, like worldwide, I feel like we're very like numb to this now. It's just like, oh yeah, Cambridge Analytica, oh yeah, Facebook, Myanmar, oh yeah, Facebook did this, and it just seems like it's like another Facebook scandal, and then everyone's like, oh yeah, but I'm still going to use Facebook.
You know what I think it is? I think we've got this idea that we're special, and that sure, other idiots will be able to be manipulated through Facebook, but I'm not going to believe all that bullshit and all the lies and all of that, and I don't do this, and so it's very easy for us to
get on a high horse
with all of that. Yeah, even with like all the advertisements. So there's all these rumors that like Siri is listening to you, or your phone is listening to you, and that's why you see all these like, you mentioned wanting to go to Amsterdam for the weekend, and then suddenly you're getting all these adverts for trains or flights to Amsterdam or something. And I think truly we're just actually that fucking predictable. Like, I'm not going to say 100% your phone is not listening to you. I don't know. But I think it's honestly, we are just that predictable. Like, Facebook has like 2 billion users. How special do you really think you are?
No, it's true though. I feel like as people are predictable. I mean, like psychology, like social sciences have shown people, like the sheep mentality, everything. Like people are predictable. That's how, like, when you think about it, the whole entire advertising industry that came out of America was literally playing on people's psychology and predicting what people want to see. And it's been happening for obviously years. Like this isn't like a new phenomenon. But yeah, you're right. It's like, I genuinely do believe that people, myself included, I'm always like, oh, I wouldn't fall for that. But actually, I think this year's really shown with like the vaccine how easy it is to kind of like get roped into these like groups or or like these little pop-ups where it's like someone talking about the vaccine's going to kill you, or the vaccine this, and it just shows you how quickly people can believe stuff that is not from a credible source. Like I've even found myself going down a rabbit hole reading like what someone's posted on their Instagram story about how the vaccine can do this, because people make themselves clever, don't they? Sound clever, like they put up some statistics, they put up some percentages, and then you're like, oh wow. But then actually, where did that come from? Who are these people? But again, people on social media don't really want to check that. It's just like, oh my god, and it creates a hysteria.
Yeah, exactly, because I think that's part of the problem, that I think even when they allow you to read all this misinformation, right, and they sort of put the onus on you to go and double check all that information, well, actually double checking, like fact checking, it's a full-time job for a lot of people. Like that it would take up your entire day to fact check every single thing that you see on social media, and I don't think it's realistic to expect every average person to go and do that, or even to do that for like a lot of things. I don't know, and I think especially because a lot of it is a bit more sneaky than, I mean, we saw with the Cambridge Analytica, they targeted specific people. It's not like they just like ran one advert for everybody. So it's quite scary. And having looked at the Facebook API over the last few weeks, the amount of information that they have I reckon a lot of the information that Facebook themselves have access to is not accessible through the API, and a lot of the information that's available through the API is honestly scary. And sure, you need to show that you're a certified business and all of that, but there's, that's easy to do, to show that you are a business, or in fact you can just get your approval as an individual even, and then suddenly you have access to this information for a lot of people. Things like who is your favorite basketball player and all of that, which is super random. All the pages you've liked. I don't know. I think it's concerning. But I think also this article is a good example of how you can pick one sort of issue with AI ethics, like bias, as a way to kind of distract from all the other shit that you're doing and all the other problems, because Facebook had this or have this department that is looking at bias in AI and all of that. And so if somebody's like, you're unethical, well actually we're funding a department that's doing all this research in AI ethics. And actually what I think is this has always made me laugh a little bit. So Facebook obviously have a lot of research in natural language processing, so they're quite a big important part of my research community. And the acronym for Facebook AI research is FAIR, right? AI.
Yeah.
And I've always found that really kind of ironic, but it's quite.
No, it really is. It really is.
It's concerning.
I feel like we actually are up on our time. Maybe. I know that went quickly as usual. That was a good chat actually.
Great. Yeah.
Well, thanks for tuning in, guys. And as always, if you want to follow us on social media, we're at Let's Chat Ethics on Twitter, and if you want to give us an email, we're at letschatethics@gmail.com.
And we'll see you next week.
I'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.